Draco Malfoy and the Truth of the Heart by Draco. We'll hear about this. Chapter 5. No Time for Goodbyes. They grabbed a table with Luna, Eureka, Ryan, and Ginny after the ceremony, only because Harry and Weasley decisively steered them away from Viktor, though Draco warned him he would talk to him eventually, which he pointedly ignored. But it was not like Draco particularly minded their company. Ryan had by now guessed that Barney was in fact Harry, and he greeted them with a shit-eating grin, asking them how hard it was to keep their hands off each other for the night, lest someone rattled his identity out and blasted the cover. That only earned him a particularly unimpressed glare from Harry, who could look quite menacing, as a ginger Draco was surprised to find, and Ginny took that as her cue to ask her boyfriend to dance. "You know, your mind is particularly infested with rock sports tonight, Harry." Luna blinked, watching him closely. "Maybe you should go outside and have the gnomes bite you, too."
"Thank you, Luna."
Harry frowned.
"I will consider it."
She nodded gravely, and Eureka leaned in to kiss her cheek. "Let's go and dance, too," she suggested, picking up her head to entwine their fingers.
"Oh, yes! Let's!"
Luna beamed, jumping up and immediately starting to twirl, causing her girlfriend to giggle. They were barely gone as Viktor took her seat, frowning after her wearily. Draco could feel Harry tense at his side.
"You know that girl and her father?"
he asked carefully. "Yes," Draco nodded, raising his eyebrows questioningly. "Why?"
"Oh, well.
"She's a good friend. We only met her father earlier. What's wrong, Viktor?" Viktor hesitated before leaning in a little, lowering his voice.
"Because that sign he's wearing,"
he muttered, eyebrows drawn in displeasure.
"that is Grindelwald's sign."
Draco's eyes widened, and he blinked at him, frozen.
"You must be mistaken,"
Harry said immediately.
"Luna is a good friend of ours, and her family would never be associated with the dark arts." "What is that about Luna?"
Weasley asked immediately, perking up, clearly ready to pick a fight. "It's nothing," Draco cut in quickly, eager to keep Weasley out of this. He caught Hermione's eye, and she seemed to get the message.
"Ron, would you care for a dance?"
she asked.
"Oh, sure,"
Weasley muttered, turning an unattractive shade of red as he got to his feet and held out his arm for Hermione to take. He threw a victorious glance at Viktor, though the other didn't pay him any mind. His eyes were on Harry instead.
"Who are you?"
he asked, and the justified question made Harry glower at him for some reason.
"Barney,"
he snapped.
"Barney Weasley."
"I see," Viktor muttered, turning to Draco again.
"Well, I'm not wrong about the sign. I've walked past it for several years. I know it well."
"Okay," Draco murmured, considering that information carefully. "There's a chance, Viktor, that Luna's father doesn't know what it means, or that he thinks it means something different than it does. They are a little strange, the Lovegoods."
"How so?"
Viktor asked, still frowning. "Well," Draco grimaced. "For one, they believe in a lot of strange creatures science doesn't exactly acknowledge. Luna tends to tell all of these stories, and..." Draco bit his lip. "It's really hard to explain unless you met her. She means well, and she's certainly not evil, so I doubt that her father means anything by it." Viktor was still frowning, but he nodded at last.
"All right," he muttered. "I trust you, but I don't like it. Grindelwald killed a lot of people. He killed my grandfather, but because it's been so long, people forget how horrible it was, and they use the sign again to shock, and I think those people need to be reminded of the horrors it caused. So."
"I understand," Draco nodded, "but I really don't think Xenophilius Lovegood glorifies Grindelwald. That doesn't sound like him." Viktor's shoulders sagged, and he sighed, clearly relenting, but now Draco sent him a weak smile.
"Well,"
Viktor said finally, aiming for a smile as well.
"how about that drink you promised me?"
Draco grinned. "Sure." He nodded, looking around for one of the floating champagne trays. Viktor located one first and beckoned it closer with his wand. It had almost reached their table when Harry blurted out quite unexpectedly,
"Gregorovitch."
Draco frowned, turning to stare at him, and Viktor too held in, utterly confused.
"What about him?"
he asked, looking around as if expecting the man to turn around the corner any moment.
"He's a wand-maker,"
Harry pointed out, eyes wide, as he stared at Viktor's wand, obviously experiencing a revelation.
"I know that,"
Viktor muttered, clearly thinking Barney Weasley was loonier than the Lovegoods.
He made your wand. That's why I thought... Quidditch.
Harry kept muttering nonsense that didn't grow any more enlightening, and Draco was about to ask him what was going on, but Viktor had already got in.
Oh, do you know Gregorovich made my wand? I read it somewhere, I think.
Harry fumbled.
In a fair magazine. I had not realized I ever discussed my wand with my fans.
Viktor muttered, sounding even more confused.
So, where is Gregorovich these days?
Harry asked, and Draco felt utterly out of his depths with the conversation. Why is it an interesting Gregorovich? What was Harry doing?
He retired several years ago.
Viktor shrugged.
I was one of the last to purchase a Gregorovich wand. They are the best, although I know, of course, that your Briton sent much store by Ollivander.
Harry did not answer, obviously lost in thought, and Viktor turned back to Draco. His expression clearly indicated that he wondered about Harry's sanity, and Draco had to bite his lip.
You want to go get something to eat?
Viktor asked, clearly aiming to get away from Barney Weasley. Draco muttered, glancing at Harry sideways, who had apparently woken from his trance to send him a glare. Draco raised his eyebrows at him. Harry's glare intensified. We'll just be gone for a little while, Draco tried, gulping in the face of Harry's silent wrath. You can find someone else to talk to, right? Harry's jaw clenched and he stood wordlessly, disappearing into the crowd. Draco bit his lip, feeling unreasonably guilty.
Okay,
Viktor muttered.
Who is he?
Draco raised his eyebrows pointedly, and after a few seconds, Victor's eyes widened, his lips parting at the realization.
Oh,
he muttered, cursing in his mother tongue.
Sorry, I did not mean to.
It's all right, Draco sighed, taking a gulp from his drink. I'll talk him down later.
Is everything okay with you, though?
He asked carefully.
He seemed...
Viktor did not finish the sentence, but the intent behind the words was obvious. We're fine, Draco assured him. He's just displayed an unexpectedly possessive side today is all.
Oh.
Viktor frowned, gazing into the direction Harry had disappeared into, putting Draco's words and his behavior together.
Do you mean... Is he jealous of me?
Believe me, I don't get it either, Draco chuckled. It's a mystery.
Well, I understand why he was worried someone would set you away.
Viktor smiled.
You're a catch, Draco, but you're not my type. Sorry.
I told him that! Draco laughed. Do you think he listened?
We are all fools in love.
Viktor shrugged.
You should have just said it was him, though. I wouldn't have thought he was crazy then.
Draco snorted, shaking his head. He's acting a little crazy tonight, Draco allowed. I'm not sure what the Gregorovich thing was about, but I'll ask him later.
I'm sure he has his reasons.
Viktor shrugged, emptying his glass.
Now let's get some food and more drinks.
They did ransack the buffet after and spent some more time catching up. Draco spotted Harry eventually at a table with Ilvius Dodge and Aunt Muriel, which he found curious, but he didn't pause the conversation long enough to consider it. It was only when Harry turned up at his side again, obviously bad-tempered, that their chat finally came to an end. It was so nice to see you again, Viktor, Draco told him in earnest, taking Harry's expression as his clue to get to his feet. Maybe you can catch Hermione for a chat now? Annoy Weasley a little, he could take it.
We'll see.
Viktor smiled.
I'm so glad we got to talk. Please take care of yourself, Draco, alright?
I will. Draco nodded, sending him one more smile before turning to Harry, who grabbed his arm and bodily dragged him towards the tent entrance. What? Wait! He protested, glancing around, but nobody paid them any mind. What are you doing? He didn't get an answer, though, at least not a verbal one, until they were outside in the dark shadows far enough that no one was likely to just stumble in on them without prior notice. Then Harry turned to him and pulled him into a fierce kiss. Draco made a noise of surprise against his lips, but Harry fisted his hair and bore down on him. For once taller than Draco in this different body, and with some effort, Draco allowed himself to relax into the touch. It felt strange, to be honest, since the person he was kissing didn't feel or smell or taste like Harry, and the part of him wanted to recoil instinctively. But he reminded himself that the person underneath was still his boyfriend, who seemed to need to touch him badly this very moment. So we focused on the way Harry's hands buried in his hair, a signature move of his, and the urgency of his movements, letting himself melt into them. When Harry pulled away at last, it was to gasp for air, and Draco was clutching at his upper arms to keep himself steady.
"This is weird," he muttered. "I never signed up for kissing gingers." "Shut up,"
Harry muttered with that eat. "Feeling better now?" Draco asked, looking up at him.
"A little,"
Harry admitted. He sighed, leaning down to press his face into Draco's throat and encase him with unusually long arms, holding Draco so tightly that it was a bit hard to breathe. Draco kept silent and let him. "Did something happen?" he asked.
"Upsetting conversation with Muriel,"
he murmured against his skin,
"about Skeeter's autobiography."
"Harry!" Draco sighed. "I told you, you shouldn't pay any mind to what Skeeter writes."
"It's not just Skeeter, though," he mumbled. "Muriel, too. She said some things, and—"
He did not elaborate, but Draco could tell that whatever she said had really hit him. Draco sighed, reaching up to run gentle fingers through Harry's fake ginger curls. "Does Dumbledore's past really matter so much?" Draco muttered. "It's over. He's dead, Harry. It's not like he can atone for what he's done."
"It matters,"
Harry said decisively. The silence stretched out between them until, quite unexpectedly, Draco saw a flash of light through the night sky. "What?" he muttered, making Harry look up. The light reached the roof of the tent and glid through it, disappearing from sight. Draco and Harry stared after it, quite stunned when Kingsley's magnified voice sounded from inside.
"The Ministry has fallen. Scrimgeour is dead. They are coming."
Heart racing, Draco caught Harry's wide eyes. The other boy grasped his hand in a death grip.
"Come on,"
he hissed, and then they were running towards the tent. They entered complete chaos. People were disapparating left and right, and cloaked figures started appearing. Death Eaters. Draco's eyes quickly found Hermione, who was pushing her way towards Weasley, who himself was shooting a curse at one of the Death Eaters. He shook his wand into his palm, thanking Dora silently for her useful present, and pulled the still camouflaged Harry across the room. But even with Harry and Ginger, Draco was still an easy target, and they were soon face to face with two Death Eaters, their way towards their friends effectively blocked.
"Hello, Malfoy,"
one of the masked men said, his voice triumphant.
"Your father is waiting for you. Now be a good boy and don't struggle."
"You wish!" Draco snorted and shot a stunner at him, which he easily deflected. His counter curse was held off by Harry's shield chime, and then, just as both Death Eaters readied for another attack, they got hit into the back. The one that had daunted Draco got blasted into the tent wall with the force of the spell used on him, and the other one dropped on the spot. Hermione and Weasley hurried toward them in their wake, out of breath.
"Where are you?"
Hermione demanded, her voice panicked. "Doesn't matter now!" Draco called. "We need to leave!" "Right!" Hermione nodded, grasping onto Draco and Weasley. "Hold on!" And then the world pressed in on them and the scene around them disappeared. Instead, they found themselves on a crowded street surrounded by people. Draco craned his neck, convinced for a moment that the Death Eaters were still on their heels.
"Where are we?"
Weasley asked.
"Tottenham Court Road,"
Hermione muttered.
"Walk, just walk. We need to find somewhere for you to change."
She started walking, and they followed her, automatically. Draco quickly realized they were in the Muggle world. The flashing lights around them were far too shrill and unnatural to have been produced by magic, and the people around them stared at them strangely for wearing robes.
"Hermione, we haven't got anything to change into," Weasley pointed out. "Why didn't I make sure I had my invisibility cloak with me?"
Harry cursed next to Draco.
"It's okay, I've got the cloak and I've got clothes for all of you,"
Hermione interrupted them.
"Just try and act natural until... This will do."
This was a shadowy alleyway which gave them some privacy to change. Hermione produced clothes for all of them from her beaded handbag and explained the charm she'd put onto it to Harry and Weasley, while Draco gratefully slipped into the shirt she handed him, donning the dress robes. Harry was made to wear the cloak, seeing that the polyjuice was slowly starting to wear off and his hair was steadily turning black, and then they took off again down the busy Muggle street.
"Just as a matter of interest, why Tottenham Court Road?"
Weasley asked Hermione.
"I've no idea," she sighed. "It just popped into my head, but I'm sure we're safer out here in the Muggle world. It's not where they'll expect us to be."
"I'm sure you're right," Draco agreed, scanning the shops around them. "We should still seek shelter, though. Being out in the open makes me feel antsy."
"All right, darling," a drunkard from the other side of the pavement yelled at Hermione. "Fancy a drink?" Ditch Ginger and Blondie, come and have a pint.
Yeah, let's sit down somewhere, Hermione agreed hastily since Weasley was already opening his mouth to shout back, Look, this will do, in here.
They then entered the most gruesome establishment Draco had visited since the Hog's Head, but under the circumstances, he wasn't going to complain. It seemed to be some kind of cafe, but the shabbiest Draco had ever been to by far, and when they sat, Draco suppressed the need to cast a cleaning charm on the table. Hermione and Weasley sat next to each other across from him, and Harry slid into the booth next to him, still under the invisibility cloak. Draco reached out for his thigh, relieved when he felt the warmth of him. Harry's hand quickly covered his, and if Draco's hand disappeared underneath the cloak in the process, it was hidden under the table, so no one would be any wiser. A crippling silence fell upon them, which was only broken when Weasley suggested they pop into the leaky cauldron to find out what was going on, only to be shot down immediately by Hermione and Draco. They ordered drinks when the waitress asked, something Muggle Draco had never heard before and didn't touch once it was sat down before him, and then Hermione suggested they head for the countryside.
Once we're there, we can send a message to the Order,
she whispered. We should probably rather contact Andromeda or someone. Draco shook his head. Someone who wasn't at the wedding. We don't know who they arrested yet.
Good thinking.
Weasley nodded, and it spoke volumes for the seriousness of the situation that he agreed with Draco.
He took a sip of his drink and made a face. God, that's revolting, he groaned. Let's get going then. I don't want to drink this muck.
Hermione opened her bag to look for the Muggle change when Draco glanced over to the only other occupied table in the cafe. The two workmen sitting there had arrived shortly after they had, and Draco was stunned to find their eyes on them. Draco scanned the face of the one facing him, and his heart fell. Death Eaters! He hissed, his hand tightening on Harry. There, at the table! They all froze, and then hell broke loose. Curses flew, but with 4 against 2, they had the upper hand, and they overpowered the Death Eaters, knocking them out eventually. The Muggle waitress had fled, which meant they needed to be on the move soon, too, before she returned.
Thank God you recognized them, Draco!
Hermione whispered, helping Weasley up from the ground. He had been thrown down by a curse, but appeared unarmed. I should have reacted sooner, he muttered, staring down at the unconscious bodies. Ralph walked in and out of the manor all the time.
I didn't recognize him either,
Harry muttered, frowning.
He was there the night Dumbledore died. That's Dolohov,
Weasley said.
I recognize him from the unwanted posters.
Never mind what they're called, Hermione shrieked. How did they find us?
Draco exhaled shakily and shrugged. I have no idea, he breathed.
Lock the door,
Harry advised in his no-nonsense voice, and Draco felt warmth spread through him. Harry's calmness was exactly what he needed right now.
And Ron, turn up the lights.
Weasley did exactly as Harry asked. No protests, and Draco suspected that they were all as relieved as he was that Harry was taking charge.
What are we going to do with them?
Weasley asked eventually, referring to the unconscious Death Eaters in their midst.
Kill them? Like kill us? They had a good go just now.
We can't, Draco said immediately. We'll leave a trail if we do.
He's right,
Harry agreed.
We just need to wipe their memories. It's better like that. It'll throw them off the scent. You're the boss,
Weasley shrugged. Hermione, you do the memory charm, Draco said. You know most about them by now. Hermione gulped, looking very pale, but she stepped up and raised her wand. Draco quickly turned around to start clearing the place from all damage, and Harry came to his aid. As soon as the cafe was restored to its prior condition and Dolohov and Rowell were propped up in their booth, the 4 of them unlocked the cafe and left the place before the waitress returned. With some luck, people would think she had fallen asleep and dreamt up the episode.
But how did they find us?
Hermione asked again as soon as they were out on the streets.
How did they know where we were?
She bit her lip and turned to Harry before asking very tentatively,
You don't think you've still got your trace on you, do you, Harry?
Impossible, Draco said immediately. They would have found him before now if he had.
The Ministry hadn't fallen before tonight,
Hermione reminded him.
The trace breaks at 17.
Weasley shook his head, eyes wide.
That's wizarding law. You can't put it on an adult.
As far as you know,
Hermione argued.
What if the Death Eaters have found a way to put it on a 17-year-old?
Let's say they have, just for argument's sake, Draco said. The Ministry was infiltrated for a long time, and now it's fallen. Laws can change, but someone must have gone near Harry to put the trace on him.
Exactly, Weasley called. He hasn't been near a Death Eater in the last 24 hours. But I was,
Harry said very quietly.
When we dueled at the wedding, You was the polyjuiced, Draco called. They didn't know it was you.
Harry didn't respond. There was a long silence between them until finally he muttered,
If I can't use magic, and you can't use magic near me without us giving away our position...
Oh, shut up! I'm not listening to this! Draco interrupted, his temper flaring.
We're not splitting up, Harry,
Hermione said firmly.
We need a safe place to hide,
Weasley pointed out.
Give us some time to think things through. Grimmauld, please.
Harry suggested, making all of them fall silent and stare at him incredulously.
Don't be silly, Harry. Snape can get in there,
Hermione reminded him.
Ron's dad said they put up jinxes against him, and even if they haven't worked, so what? I swear I'd like nothing better than to meet Snape.
Merlin and Avalon! Draco muttered, running ahead through his hair.
What else is there?
Harry hissed, glaring at them.
It's the best chance we've got. Snape's only one Death Eater. If I've still got the trace on me, we'll have whole crowds of them on us wherever else we go.
And as much as Draco wanted to, he couldn't argue with that logic. Neither it seemed to good Hermione and Weasley, so they ended up apparating a second time, this time to a square in front of an old brick wall building. He had just enough time to take in the numbers 11 and 12 above the front doors to their left and right before Harry stepped up to the house and the foundations of the building shifted, making room for an extra house in their midst. Number 12. Crafty, Draco muttered, raising an eyebrow. Looks like my family was properly paranoid.
St. Merlin they were,
Harry muttered.
Let's go.
They rushed up to the newly revealed front door, and Draco kept glancing over his shoulder, making sure they weren't being followed. But they seemed, as of now, quite alone. Harry unlocked the door with a tap of his wand and practically pushed them inside. He was the last one to enter, pulling the door closed behind him, which immediately locked once more. As soon as the door fell shut, the lights turned on in the hallway, and Draco flinched, reaching out for Harry's hand instinctively. Harry squeezed it, and Draco took a shaky breath. There were house elf heads on the walls, and at the end of the corridor a portrait was hanging on the wall covered by long, filthy linen. An umbrella stand that looked like a troll leg was lying on the floor.
I think somebody's been in here,
Hermione whispered.
That could have happened as the order left,
Weasley noted. Draco shook out his arm until his wand landed in his palm. His hand was shaking, but he made the spell work anyway. Hominum Revenio, he breathed, feeling the magic flowing out of him and into the house, not giving a favorable response. He breathed out in relief. We're alone, he said.
You sure?
Harry checked. Positive, Draco nodded.
Seems like the spells the order cast work,
Harry muttered. Yeah, about that, Weasley frowned. Shouldn't we have run into those by now?
Maybe they only activate if Snape shows up,
Hermione suggested.
Only one way to find out.
Harry shrugged and pushed past Draco into the corridor despite Draco's muffled protest. There was an immediate reaction to Harry's movement. They heard Moody's voice whispering,
Severus Snape,
making Harry freeze in his tracks and cling to Draco's hand.
We're not Snape,
Harry gasped. And then they got hit by a wave of magic. The tongue-tying curse, Draco realized, as his tongue seemed to roll in on itself. Next, they were approached by a shadowy figure from the end of the corridor. Hermione screamed. Draco panicked, drawing his wand and trying to pull Harry backwards. The linen fell from the portrait at the end of the corridor, and the woman in the picture started to throw loud insults at them.
No! Harry shouted. No, it wasn't us. We didn't kill you.
Only then did Draco recognize the horrible likeness, or unlikeness, to their former headmaster. The realization struck Draco the same moment the figure dissolved into a cloud of dust, leaving them all coughing. Hermione was crouching on the floor, shielding her head with her arms. Weasley was bending down, shakily offering comfort. Draco, too, was trembling, and he was still clinging to Harry. The woman in the painting was the only one still shouting bloody murder, and Harry yelled at her to shut up, directing his wand at the portrait and covering it with the linen once more. Then he turned to Draco, catching his eyes.
You okay?
He asked. Yeah, he breathed, gulping. You? Harry nodded grimly before turning to Weasley, who was just helping Hermione to her feet.
That was...
Hermione mumbled, sounding close to tears.
Yeah,
Harry nodded.
But it wasn't really him, was it? Just something to scare Snape.
They then proceeded into the house, making sure that Draco's spell hadn't been lying. But they were truly quite alone. They couldn't see anyone outside either, which probably meant that Harry didn't have the trace on him, or else they'd have been able to follow them here. They made their way into the sitting room, Hermione and Weasley taking the dusty sofa, and Draco reluctantly sitting on the armchair watching Harry, who seemed too restless to sit. "All right," Draco muttered, drawing his wand again. "I'll contact Andromeda. With any luck, Dor will have made it back with news, and—" But then Harry cried out, his hand flying to his forehead. Draco jumped out and caught his wrist. "Harry!" he breathed. "Are you okay?"
What did you see?
Weasley called, on his feet now, too.
Did you see him at what place?
Draco flashed him a glare because was that really the first question asked? But Harry was already answering, murmuring,
"No, I just felt anger. He's really angry." "But that could be at the burrow," Weasley called. "What else? Didn't you see anything?"
"He's not a crystal ball, Weasley!" Draco hissed. "It doesn't work that way!" With jerky movements, he reached his free hand up to his neck and reached for his necklace. He pulled it over his head and threw it at Weasley with a little too much force, causing it to almost hit the other boy in the face. He just managed to bring up his hands to catch it. "Use that!" he hissed. "You can see them like that without harassing Harry!" Hermione, though, seemed to be somewhere else with her thoughts. "He shouldn't be using the connection at all." She got through their discussion, clearly fretting. "We know how dangerous that is." "Oh, bloody hell, Hermione, will you please shut up?" Draco yelled, making her flinch. "He can't control it! Stop making this about you!" He turned back to Harry, who was still pressing his fist to his forehead, eyes clenched shut and deathly pale. He reached out to gently cup his cheek. "Harry," he whispered. "Breathe, okay?" Harry took a shuddering breath but didn't speak. It looked like he was going to be sick. The moment was disrupted by a light bursting through the wall and into the room. Hermione screamed and Draco jumped until he realized that it was just a Patronus. A weasel, to be exact. And it stopped in the middle of the room and opened its snout to speak in Mr. Weasley's voice. "Family safe. Do not reply. We are being watched." The Patronus dissolved and Weasley sank to the couch with a groan of relief, Draco's necklace still in hand. He couldn't care less about it for now. He would use it later to check on Dora and Remus. It was probably too dangerous to send a Patronus anyway. Maybe they were being watched too. Draco's eyes were back on Harry, though, whose face was pinched once more.
"Bathroom,"
he muttered, stepping away from Draco abruptly and stumbling out of the room. Draco's jaw clenched and he turned to Hermione, who was sitting with Weasley again, a hand on his shoulder. Both were watching Harry go, clearly wary. "I'm going after him," he told them. "Don't follow!" "It's his scar," Hermione breathed. "The connection should have closed, Draco. We can't use it." "Don't!" Draco snapped, furious with her. "Stop making him feel bad for being unable to occlude. We know he tried, but he just can't, and there's no changing it now. We have to deal with it. So stop bloody guilt-tripping him, Hermione. It's not helping." She had the decency to look abashed at his words, which satisfied him as he turned to follow Harry out of the room and down the hall. He took a moment to find the next bathroom, only identifying it because the door locked. "Harry!" Draco called, knocking on the door. "Come on, let me in, please." It took a moment, and then there was a shuffling sound before Harry unlocked the door and opened it. He was breathing heavily, and his face was almost gray, but he did not protest when Draco wrapped him into a tight embrace, holding him close to his chest for a long moment. Rather, he sagged against him as if his strings had been cut.
"He's torturing Raoul and Dolohov,"
Harry muttered into his shoulder. "Does he know we were at that cafe?" Draco asked gently.
"I think so,"
Harry whispered.
"He's furious with them."
"Of course he is," Draco nodded, reaching up to stroke his sweaty mop of black hair. "He doesn't know where we are now, though, does he?"
"No."
Harry shook his head.
"I don't think so."
"That means we can rest for tonight."
"I don't know if I can,"
Harry whispered. "Let's try," Draco urged, turning his head to kiss his temple. "We'll need our strength." Harry sighed and finally nodded. They decided to all sleep in the sitting room, the boys on sleeping bags on the floor, and Hermione on the couch. Weasley had put up camp right at the foot of the couch, and they were talking softly as they were getting ready for bed. Harry was in the bathroom once more, changing and brushing his teeth, and Draco had put their sleeping bags right next to each other's. He was going to stay close to Harry tonight.
"Malfoy,"
Weasley said softly, making Draco look up. The other boy held up his necklace, and when Draco held out his hand, he threw it across the space separating them. Draco got it easily, weighing the heirloom in his hands.
"Thank you,"
Weasley said, clearing his throat. "No problem," Draco shrugged. He put the necklace on again and held the stone in his hand. closing his eyes and focusing on Dora and Remus. Soon a picture of them came up in his mind, of them in their sparsely furnished kitchen, talking quietly and with serious faces. Draco gulped, thinking of Andromeda, and the picture changed to the Tonks' living room, where his aunt and Ted were sitting on the sofa, both looking just as worried as their daughter and son-in-law. Again he let his focus shift, this time to his mother, because she had not been with his aunt like he'd expected her to be. Instead, he found her sitting in some unknown parlor, alone, looking out over the sea. Draco realized she must have already fled to whichever safe house she had prepared. He opened his eyes when Harry entered the room again, looking completely beat. He lowered himself to sit down on the sleeping bag next to Draco's, just looking at him. He seemed so lost that Draco couldn't help but reach out to brush his cheek tenderly, hoping to comfort. "It will be all right," he whispered. "You'll see." Harry didn't answer. He did lie down when Draco suggested it, though, and left his sleeping bag unzipped so Draco could wrap himself around Harry in an embrace, his head resting on the other boy's shoulder. He was aware that he was bound to kick his own sleeping bag off by not zipping it properly, but he was willing to take that chance. He just wanted to be close to Harry. "Good night," Hermione said timidly.
Light,
Weasley said, getting the lights with his deluminator. "Sleep well," Draco said. Harry remained quiet, though Draco knew he wasn't sleeping yet. He moved a little closer to him and buried his nose in his neck, comforted when he could feel his pulse.